Thank you for joining today's webinar. We're going to be looking at Protect, Classify, Control, SharePoint Governance Essentials with Valto. So we'll start with some introductions. For those of you who have not attended a Valto webinar before, I'll give you a quick introduction to myself and Valto, the company. Then we'll move on to why document governance matters. We'll look at some challenges, benefits of proper governance. We'll go through some tools and demos. I'll look into a bit of Purview, and then we'll finish with the case study as well. So Valto, we were founded around 2017. We're up to 50 employees now. We're sort of a head office based in Chester. Looking at the right-hand side, you can see the various pillars that we work with. So we're a Microsoft specialist providing consultancy across modern workplace, Microsoft 365 and Azure. We have a substantial business applications team who specialize in the Power Platform, Power BI, and Power Automate. Then we've got the data and AI team as well. So they provide AI solutions. These can include things like Fabric, extensions on Power BI, Azure Pro Code development, and also Copilot. Quick introduction to myself. So my name is Robert Thomas. I head up the Modern Workplace team here at Valto. I also oversee some managed services and the Microsoft 365 and Azure. Really interested in helping customers get the most from things like SharePoint governance, which is what we're covering today. And I've also put my QR code there as well. So if you wish to follow me on LinkedIn and get more insights into some of the next webinars and events that are coming up, just scan that QR code now and add me on there. Okay, so let's get straight into the webinar. So we're going to look at why document governance matters and why it's important organizations look into this. So some of the key elements of why it's important. So I guess compliance violations and audit failures. So when content is unmanaged, compliance becomes a serious issue. Organizations today face strict regulatory requirements, whether it's GDPR, the ISO standards, or maybe industry-specific rules. If your documents aren't properly classified, retained, or secured, you risk failing those audits and even possibly, facing financial penalties. So it's not just about ticking boxes. It's all about protecting your organization's reputation, because essentially that is what's on the line at the end of the day. Next, we've got version control chaos. So, version control can cause chaos and disruption and duplication. So without governance, multiple versions of the same document start appearing in email attachments, your Teams chats, personal OneDrive folders. I've seen it in lots of organizations. When we start a relationship, people spend hours trying to figure out which version is correct, and that confusion can lead to mistakes, sometimes quite costly ones. So, governance ensures that there's only one source of truth. If you think about some really important, master services agreements or internal policy documents, for example, you want that single source of truth. You don't want multiple copies, and even more so when you're dealing with, documents that you're interacting with between yourself and clients, for example. And then next, we've sort of got data loss and inefficiency. So finally, unmanaged content often means files are scattered across, different locations, probably shared through, unsecured channels, or may even be lost entirely, which is really, really frustrating as well. So this in itself creates inefficiencies and increases the risk of losing that critical business information. Imagine the impact if a key contract or a compliance document disappears at the wrong time. It's these things that kind of have that massive effect on how you run and operate as a business. So if we look at some of the benefits, obviously it's going to be the opposite of what I've just described. But if we flip that around and look at the benefits of governance, we kind of have that improved efficiency and findability. I talked about losing documents, but with governance in place, documents are easy to find. Structured libraries, metadata for tagging those documents, and consistent naming conventions means less time searching and more time working. Instead of wasting hours looking for files, your team can focus on delivering value and excelling at their roles. Then we've got sort of better collaboration and control. So governance It doesn't restrict collaboration. If anything, it enables it. So when policies are clear and platforms like SharePoint and Teams are structured properly, everyone knows where to work and how to share securely. So this reduces duplication, prevents that accidental data leaks and ensures, collaboration happens within those compliance boundaries. So again, that's super important. And then we've got audit readiness and security. So finally, governance is going to ensure that you're always ready for an audit. Version history, retention policies, sensitivity labels, they provide that transparency and protection that you should have in place. So at any one point in time, you can demonstrate compliance, which is going to build trust with customers, stakeholders, and you're not going to be like sort of scrambling to, get these like audits over the line. You've got kind of you've got that assurance that all these things are in place, and you're going to be able to share this information when you're working with like key stakeholders and new business, for example. And just kind of a closing transition, really. So governance isn't just about control; it's about enabling that efficiency, collaboration, and compliance. So these benefits are why organizations are investing heavily in structured Microsoft 365 governance and putting the time into effort to getting the foundations right. Obviously, we've got AI, which is in the mix now as well. So AI is the new interface and how we might also be interacting with data and documents, for example. That plugs well into SharePoint. But AI is super powerful. It can go and find. It's not uncommon for AI technology to go and find those 5,000 documents that we may be sifting through manually, for example. So AI is going to bring some of these issues into the spotlight more than maybe what you had before when you weren't using things like Copilot, for example. So super important to get this foundation right. Okay, so we're going to look at structuring Microsoft 365 for governance. So some of the things that you should be, you should have in place already, or if not, then these are the things that you need to be looking at. So let's go to the first one. So this is not a Microsoft 365 security webinar, so I'm not going to go too much into detail about this, but having that baseline is super important to having the foundations to work with these collaboration tools, whether that's SharePoint and Teams, OneDrive, or also some of the AI tech, which companies are adopting really fast now. So I'll just touch on this really quick. So the first one is identity protection. Things like MFA and conditional access. All users, including admins, should be leveraging the conditional access policies to enforce, device compliance checks, location-based restrictions, and risk-based adaptive access. So if a user's been hacked, for example, Microsoft Security is able to identify uncommon patterns and block that access. Moving on to things like device compliance and endpoint management. So enrolling your devices into Intune, making sure your devices have to be healthy and compliant before they access. Applying app protection policies for bring your own device scenarios. So many organizations now allow users to access data on their personal mobile devices or tablets. So it's really important that you kind of get the baseline structure in place for there as well. Looking at things like least privileged access and privileged identity management. So looking at your role-based access control, using things like PIM for your just-in-time access, for admin access, and then regularly reviewing those and removing unused roles and permissions. Not everyone has to have the global admin role to make changes to SharePoint and things. They just need the SharePoint admin, and having that least privileged access is going to be best going forwards. Then the other one is data protection. So we're going to cover that a lot more in this webinar because it focuses on some of the tools for governance, Purview being one of them, but deploying sensitivity labels and things like data loss prevention or DLP, encrypting that sensitive data across SharePoint, OneDrive and Teams, and even maybe AI generated content as well to enforce that compliance. And then finally, just having the continuous monitoring and threat detection in place, using things like Microsoft Defender for Office, or Microsoft Defender XDR. These are all fantastic tools to automate that threat response. This was something that maybe an enterprise would invest heavily in, but we're also implementing this into SMBs as well. It's becoming the norm to have security monitoring tools in place. With the threat landscape that we've got now, it's kind of an absolute standard for us and something that we recommend for all customers. Okay, so let's more focus on some of the SharePoint stuff as well. This is a SharePoint governance webinar after all. So looking at some of the baseline things that we recommend in SharePoint. So these are quite basic controls and part of the CIS benchmark, but these are all things that we look at with our customers when we're looking at using SharePoint and getting that into a good standard. So things like team and site sharing. So control the teams, groups, and sites that can be shared with people outside your organization. You wouldn't want people to share documents in the HR site. So locking those things down is going to be essential to just, blocking off access early on. Maybe even restricting domains that people can share with outside the organization. So perhaps your organization deals with highly sensitive data. You might only want to share that data with approved partners. So things could be like local authority or health boards, for example. You would lock down external sharing to those domains only. Things like self-service site creation, that should be reserved for an IT or an administrative task only. So we want to prevent users from creating SharePoint sites and team sites to reduce that team sprawl and allows us, a greater control on our SharePoint estate. And then kind of also restricting site file and folder sharing to members of maybe specific security groups. So you can go a bit more granular, especially if you're a larger organization. You're going to have data that doesn't need to be shared with everybody in the company. Again, when you're using things like AI, it's going to go and find those documents that have been shared with everybody by default. So it's quite an important aspect to look at. The next one is restricting team and group creation to members or specific security group. This is quite important because creating Microsoft 365 groups, for example, often creates a SharePoint site and mailboxes and things as well. So it just increases that sprawl that you're getting in 365 that you want to have that control over. And then a group naming policy as well. So enforcing prefixes or suffix on group and team names, that's going to be good for governance and maintaining and searching for those groups as well. And things like group expiration policies. So, inactive groups and teams should set to expire or delete if they're kind of not containing that required data. So if you're spinning up groups for kind of like quick fire projects and things, then, set these to expire. They can be approved or denied when they come in. And it's really easy to kind of help with that sprawl. And then again, per group guest access. So, allow team and group sharing with people outside the organization and, on a group basis to prevent people adding guests, especially where sensitive data resides. So that's a good baseline. These are some of the extended things that we also look at as well with customers. So I think, especially with AI coming into the mix, as soon as you enable Copilot licenses, for example, all those SharePoint sites are scraped by the semantic index. If you're not 100% comfortable with your kind of governance and data controls or where you're up to, there are things that you can do to restrict SharePoint sites from search criteria, which is really important, especially if you've got things like a private office or board level sites. You can exclude those straight away, which gives you peace of mind. I highly recommend getting a list of those explicit sites and at least reducing those for now. And then evaluating the share controls across kind of SharePoint. So, you can find out who the owners are of these SharePoint sites and the permissions to make sure they're all correct. Same for the OneDrive for Business. We also run things like sharing reports to understand exactly what files have been sort of shared across the business, and setting things like the default sharing link type as well. So we don't really want to create links that kind of allow the whole tenant to access that data. The default should be setting the links to a specific person only, or specific people, for example. And then things like sharing link expiration. Then we might go into a bit more depth in identifying sort of inactive sites, restricting the access. And if those sites aren't needed, then we can move those to Microsoft 365 Archive, which is a fantastic tool if you need to kind of retain some of that data for your regulatory purposes. You don't have to delete that data straight away. We can implement inactive site policies and things and activate Microsoft 365 Archive. Then we can kind of, like I said before, look at that overshared content. So we can run like data access governance reports, apply those to sites, and then we can apply our policies on top of those to kind of get those sites cleaned up and reach out to the owners and things, or find sites and groups where there is no owner, and kind of adjust the permissions as we need, to kind of apply that governance on there as well. And then just the final piece as well, which we'll cover in a bit more detail, is just the Purview elements. So just confirming the unified auditing is enabled. There are some customers out there where that isn't enabled, or they might not have the correct licensing for that. So again, we highly recommend turning that on so all actions in your environment are captured. Then we'll look at things like sensitivity labels, so manually labeling documents, using some out-of-the-box sensitivity labels just to help secure that, whether that's department-based or company-wide based, just to kind of add that extra control. And then also looking at, creating and deploying data loss prevention policies as well across SharePoint, but also extending that to OneDrive and Teams as well, which is good. And then also looking at retention policies, so we can keep the data that we need, but also get rid of the data, that we don't need to keep for indefinitely. The more data that you keep, the more kind of liable you are. So it is good to have that data lifecycle management within your tenancy as well. And then we've also got things like e-discovery for content search. This is really powerful. You can set specific filters. You can go and find data that hasn't been modified, or data with keywords in and things that you could then use to maybe purge at a later date. But it's good to kind of get a report to see where you're up to and what, if you've got data that's older than a certain date. Okay, so we're going to look at like governance tools with SharePoint as well. So we can look at some of the tools that you can use to effectively set up SharePoint, maybe even outside some of the compliance policies, but create a SharePoint environment that actually works with governance. So here I'm going to look at the SharePoint sort of ISO document management. So it's all very good having those policies as well, which we'll discuss later on, but even when we design document solutions for the Microsoft 365 platform, governance isn't just like a nice to have, it's the foundation for security, compliance, and efficiency. So by building solutions in SharePoint around ISO standards, you're going to ensure alignment and with global best practices and reduce risks. You're going to be able to support those certifications and give confidence to regulators and customers, from the offset. Comprehensive audit trails provide accountability by tracking, every action, view, edit, share, for example. And that enables your organization to demonstrate, your compliance, during audits and investigations. And then things like robust version control is going to prevent that chaos, ensuring teams work on the correct document, changes are tracked and approved, and previous versions can be restored, which is critical for accuracy and legal defensibility, I would say. And then, but also creating like a streamlined review and approval process to enforce that governance, at every different stage. You want to reduce bottlenecks and maintain that compliance while ensuring, these decisions are documented or captured. And then I guess as well, looking at the last piece, accessibility from anywhere. Secure accessibility from anywhere is essential in today's hybrid work environment. I think things like file servers are well in the past, and this is the way forward. So having a solution that also fits into that is probably going to be #1 priority as well. Okay, so just based on what I've discussed, I'll do a quick demo of what we would call a controlled document solution. So this is an example of a product and a platform that we build on top of these compliance settings to help customers get the best out of governance and document management within the SharePoint environment. So I'll just close this down and I'll bring up the product to give you guys a quick demo. So now we've got one of our example SharePoint intranet solutions on the screen here for you. And what I'll do is I'll go to the document section here at the top. There we go. I'll just zoom in a little bit for you so you can see a bit better. Okay, so this is not your standard kind of document library here with the out-of-the-box metadata tags. This is a more customized controlled document solution. So I'll talk you through some of the elements that we can see on the screen. So we've got the documents here via the document list. We've also got things like an approval status. So we track sort of major and minor versions of different documents. Any changes to those documents can then go through an approval process. And if we move to the right a bit, you can actually see who the approver and reviewer is. So this is a fantastic mechanism where small or even large incremental changes to documents can go through that proper approval process before the draft versions are then made live and then made available to the rest of the business or the organization. So this is kind of managing that approval process within the control doc solution. We've also got some different metadata tags here as well. So we've got a review date. So this is automatically generated when a document is added to this library and has been initially approved. It will automatically trigger a review date. The reviewer and the approver will then receive automatic emails to go and review that document as it currently stands, and they can then make any suggestions back to the team if they need to kind of update this document for compliance reasons. We've also got some other metadata tags as well. So this one here, we've got things like key documents, whether they're key to the organization. So by key, I mean, is it some sort of policy that every single employee should be aware of within the organization? Or is it maybe something that's possibly not key, but maybe more for a specific standard operating procedure? So when we make changes to documents, we can then send this off to an approver to review, and that'll generate an automatic email. So I'll quickly show you what that looks like. So we can hear the password policy that's been requested by Joe Bloggs. Takes you to a link to the document, and they can either approve or reject some of those changes that have been made to that document by the individual. If I go across at the top, we've got what we call a document tracker. So whenever time an update is made to the policy, you can then push that update out to either the entire company or subsets of departments, and you can get them to read that document and accept the changes and almost acknowledge that you've read that document as well. So you can get a notification here. And end users will also receive reminders to go in and approve that document themselves. So if there's if there's an update to say the working from home policy or the data breach policy, I can make sure everyone's read it and they'll get notifications until they finally confirm themselves. We then got things like tracker groups. So these are actually linked to security groups within your Microsoft 365 estate or Azure AD or Entra. So we've got things like all staff, so we can set documents that the entire organization has to read. Or maybe there's we can create tracker groups based on just the sales teams. These could be things like standard sales operating procedures that they can follow as well. We've also got options to like categorize the documents. So we can kind of review subsets of documents as well, like documents where I am the reviewer or the approver. We can also group these into kind of buckets that are more relevant to the business or the organization. So things like internal audits, or maybe there could be things like ISO documents as well. So we can customize this solution based on these kind of different buckets and categories as well within the controlled document solution. So this is an example of how also building a tool within the SharePoint platform around your documents can kind of enable that governance and that version control, and also have those approval processes in place, and that we've only ever got sort of one single source of truth. We've then gone on to build things like Copilot agents. So when the data is really sound, up to date, and compliant, it's really easy to plug in things like AI agents. So we've got an internal policy agent that can go out and I can type in things like, can you let me know what the expense policy is or the loan working policy, for example? And rather than having to go into a SharePoint environment and find that, it could just bring the information back to the user via the AI interface. So having these components in place is really good to solidify that governance and control. So again, this is something that we can customize for customers, and again, we can sort of tailor that to their needs really as well. But Purview, which is Microsoft's sort of hero tool to manage governance and compliance, also in SharePoint as well, but across the entire 365 stack. Okay, so we're going to be exploring Microsoft Purview. So this is basically a unified platform for data governance, security, compliance. Purview is deeply integrated into the Microsoft 365 ecosystem, which just makes it a natural extension of the tools many organizations are already using. So if you're on Microsoft 365 Business Premium, you already have access to several Purview features. These could be things like basic data loss prevention, information protection. However, some organizations that need those advanced capabilities like the full e-discovery, insider risk management, or the enterprise grade compliance controls, Microsoft actually provides or offers like add-on licenses. So these add-ons elevate Purview to the same level as the more expensive enterprise suites. So this basically ensures you can scale governance and compliance as the business grows. So these suites significantly reduce the cost of having to purchase, say, a Microsoft E5 license. You could still purchase Business Premium, get all of the fantastic security features, and then choose one of the cheaper compliance bolt-ons, which kind of keep that total cost down while still enabling those features as well, which is good. So we've got sort of three main pillars to the Purview suite. I'll go through some of the controls and some of the products that kind of build up this stack. And hopefully we'll go through and demo just a couple of those across the SharePoint environment as well. So first we've got sort of data security, which focuses on securing data across its entire life cycle, wherever it resides. So that could be SharePoint, OneDrive, or Teams, or even Azure resources, but that's probably for another day. And in today's sort of hybrid environments, data is also going to be spread across on-premise systems and endpoints as well. So Purview provides tools to ensure sensitive information remains protected at all times. We've got one of those components is data loss prevention, or DLP. This prevents accidental or even intentional sharing of sensitive data outside of the organization. And it actually monitors and enforces policies across emails, documents, and other collaboration platforms as well. Then we've got a sort of an enterprise grade feature here. This is insider risk management. So this identifies risky behaviors within the organization, such as data exfiltration or policy violations, and helps mitigate them before they scale. So it takes in lots of different signals to kind of predict insider, risky behavior across multiple different streams. So it's very machine learning and AI driven as well. Then we've got information protection, which we'll do a quick demo of. So this uses sensitivity labels to classify and protect data based on confidentiality levels. So this main component here is going to be documents, which we'll have a look in SharePoint. This is either through encryption or access controls. Information protection is going to ensure that the data is safeguarded wherever it travels, which is really important to know, which we'll cover in demo. And in terms of sort of the transition as well, so which security is in place, then it kind of what's more valuable when it comes in. Next pillar, we've got data governance. So data governance is all about responsibly unlocking value from your data. So organizations often struggle with fragmented data sources and inconsistent quality. Purview addresses these challenges by providing, some sort of visibility of that data estate and also enforcing some controls. So these are probably more enterprise grade features, but there are some elements that do fall into business premium. So the data discovery component automatically scans and classifies data across your entire estate, whether that's in Azure or 365, even third-party sources, but it works fantastic with SharePoint. So this helps you know what data you have and where it lives. So you don't even have to sort of manually sift through data to try and classify it. Microsoft 365 and Purview will actually go and do that for you. Then we've got data quality. So poor data quality is going to lead to poor decisions, inevitably, and Purview enables you to monitor and improve data accuracy, consistency, and completeness as well. Then we've got data curation, so organize and enrich your data so it's ready for things like analytics and AI and machine learning. So this ensures that your teams can trust and leverage that data effectively. And then data estate insight. So this is all about gaining a holistic view of your data landscape, including like usage patterns and compliance posture, to then go and make those informed decisions as well. And then finally, we've got data compliance, so the final pillar, which sort of helps organizations manage critical risks and adhere to those regulatory requirements. With increasing global regulations like GDPR and HIPAA compliance, this is no longer an option, so it's an essential tool really. This comprises of things like a compliance manager, so it's a centralized dashboard to assess your compliance posture and track progress against regulatory frameworks. So you could spin up the compliance manager and enable ISO certifications. So all of the controls and checklists will be in there, and you'll be able to log your progress and either map technical controls or map things like policy documents and things. And you'll get a score and progress of how far you are with, say, ISO, for example. Then we have e-discovery and audit. So this is a very powerful tool. So this enables legal teams to search, hold, and review data for litigation or investigations, ensuring transparency and accountability. You can use things like complex content searches to find very specific pieces of data across the entire tenancy, including SharePoint. Then we've got communication compliance. So this monitors internal communications to detect sort of policy violations or even inappropriate content, help maintaining a safe and compliant workplace. So this is quite a handy tool for a compliance team to use. Then we've got data lifecycle management. So this can automate retention and deletion policies, to ensure that data is kept only as long as necessary, reducing that risk and also storage costs as well. You don't want to be paying for data that the company or organization doesn't need to keep. And then the records management piece just helps manage the official records in line with regulatory requirements, ensuring that integrity and accessibility. So Purview is more than just a kind of a standard compliance tool. It is a comprehensive platform that secures your data, governs it for maximum value, and ensures you meet those regulatory obligations. By adopting Purview, organizations can build that trusted data ecosystem that kind of drives that innovation whilst minimizing the risk. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So we're going to now go into a quick Purview demo. We won't go through all of those components we just discussed, but we'll go through ones that a lot of organizations should adopt as part of a baseline, really. I would say Purview components that are native to the Business Premium Suite and ones that work really well with SharePoint. Let's just bring up this demo. Okay. So we've got a fictional tenant here, Contoso Electronics, and we're actually on the global sales SharePoint site, particularly in the retail section. So we've got some documents here. The first one here is actually called Credit Cards for Purchase Department, which doesn't look very good. If I go into this document here, you can see we've got some fictional credit cards that somebody has actually written down for the purchase team to use. Hopefully this would never happen, but if you go across there. So now this document's actually with DLP, it's detected that these items actually conflict with a policy in the organization. Purview has actually also recommended that we change one of the sensitivity labels to confidential. So it's kind of restricted on there as well. And if I actually go into my email, so as the administrator or the data security officer, it's actually been flagged that there's an item in the organization that's been blocked for everyone except the owner or the last modifier or the site owner itself. Detected issues from DLP, data loss prevention. So the items contain the following sensitive information, so credit card numbers, perhaps the items or maybe the folder's been shared with people within the organization already as well. So you can actually open this to fix those items and remediate that. So again, this is using DLP to find data that should not be exfiltrated from the organization. We've had some automated kind of options come up from the end user, and then the administration team and security team have actually been notified of a DLP breach. So I can go into the back end of this and actually show you some of how this works. So if we go to data loss prevention in the solutions for Purview, here we go. We should have some alerts. Perhaps this is a slightly older one. That's a refresh. Let's just go straight to the policies anyway. So we can actually go to the policies here, and we've got some US financial data. We'll use that as a quick example. And we've also got some GDPR piece there as well. If I go into this one, if I edit this policy, you can see what the components that kind of build up the policy and enforce some of those things that we just saw before. So you give it a name and a description, so we know what the policy is for there as well. We can choose to assign it to an admin unit, but I'm going to leave it for the full scope of Entra ID. And then here is where we kind of choose where the policy is going to apply. So we can see here it's actually applying to all of the SharePoint sites, although we can be more granular with this. And you can see there's lots of other options there as well. We have the ability to create sort of different rules, so you can make this policy as granular as you like. The default you tend to get is sort of what happens when it detects low volumes of this type of content, or even high volumes. So low volume something that might be more legitimate. People do tend to handle some of this data, or high volume would be sort of maybe mass exfiltration. If I just go into the high volume here. So in this element, we actually get to kind of decide what type of data goes into the content sort of container area. So we can choose things like EU credit card numbers, passport numbers, and all sorts of other different sensitive info types, which I'll cover shortly. These kind of define what the data is. Then we can choose the confidence level, and we can even specify kind of how many instances of that data needs to be present in that document, for example, before the policy then goes and decides what actions to take. So if it detects any one of these, as you can see at the top, it's then going to kind of perform an action. And this action could be blocking users from receiving or accessing the content, for example. We can block the entire company if it's kind of a high risk, or maybe just people outside the organization. And you can add other actions there as well. So you can run some more automation in the background. Yeah, that could go off and kind of set things like Teams prompts and all sorts of different things as well. Or fire into maybe a data sock, perhaps. Then we can do things like user notifications. So we can actually inform the users to kind of help them, properly use and access the sensitive information. And then we can kind of email people, notify users within 365 with, with a policy tip or email notifications as you saw before. And there are some more options down here as well. So, we can notify different people across the organization. If it's a much larger enterprise, perhaps department owners are assigned to owners of SharePoint sites and things like that as well. And then we can allow the user different options to override and provide business justifications. So maybe like in a low volume, that might be okay. But high volume as well, we could kind of remove that feature so it's just hard blocked. Then we've got things like incident reports and further notifications. and kind of suggestions for like more sensitivity rules as well. So it's a really powerful feature, or a really powerful tool, I should say. Then once we're kind of happy with the setup and the data that we're looking for, we can then actually choose to sort of run the policy in simulation mode. I'd recommend doing that first if this is the first time you're using sort of DLP, because in simulation mode, you can kind of enable the policy tips so the users get kind of used to it, and you can provide training and communications material. But the other piece as well is kind of the simulation will actually detect the data and fire the alerts into the data team or the administration team. They'll then have the ability to kind of understand what type of data is going to be captured if this policy was to be turned on. I'm just going to cancel that. So you saw I actually talked about something called sensitive info types, which is the classification of data that Purview is going to look for when you turn on these policies. Sensitive info types is actually a really powerful tool in that you could define your own sensitive info types. So that you can do these with things like keyword dictionaries. You can do things like regular expressions. Perhaps you've got your own like unique identification numbers or intellectual property within your organization. You can create a sensitive info type that will actually match that specific pattern, and then you can then put those into things like your DLP policies on there as well. So if you go to classifiers, we've got sensitive info types here as well. So Microsoft provides a whole host of kind of industry standard ones across the globe. So you'll find things like components native to Azure, but I guess for document management, things like passport numbers for different regions, credit card numbers, as I kind of showed you before. There's a whole host of different sensitive info types there as well. And you can kind of create your own info types. And this could be based on, again, as I said, regular expressions, so patterns. You could even do sort of fingerprint-based SIT. So this is kind of what we call document fingerprinting. So if you've got like a standard form that you use in your organization, or a standard document template that always captures, it could be a user onboarding form, for example, which contains personal information. You can scan that document template and it becomes a document fingerprint. So Microsoft 365 will always know when that template is stored on SharePoint, it's likely going to contain sensitive information. So factor that into the DLP policy and that kind of thing. There are some other areas like trainable classifiers where you can provide lots of sample content to say this is the type of material I want to block, and then you can provide lots of content as a negative to say this is the stuff that I don't want to block, and you can train Purview to kind of understand what your sensitive data looks like, and then it will have a much better job of understanding and protecting that data in real time. So it uses machine learning algorithms to kind of understand your data. Okay, so let's go back to SharePoint. So we've actually got another document here as well. So this is the performance document. If I just open this, so we've got something called sensitivity labels. Now these are the classification labels that you can classify and protect documents with if you need to. So the way that it works is you, as the administrator or organization, you create your different classifications, and then you can decide if those classifications will also contain additional security controls and measures. So this one here, public, for example, if I was to select this label, it would just classify the document as public. There would be no security policy in place because it's fit for public consumption. I can then choose other labels like confidential, and I can select all employees, and you can see there's a padlock next to this. So this basically says that this document's confidential and only employees of Contoso or members of this Microsoft 365 tenancy can access this data. You can go more granular, and you can create labels that maybe just protect the document and only allow a specific group of people to access the document or the data. You can actually allow custom labels. So when a user selects this, they can specify the exact people who will have access to the document, so they can narrow down to just one person, and they can do this on an ad hoc basis if they like as well. And then we may even have labels that could be created and published for specific projects. So if you have a project with lots of artifacts on SharePoint, you can protect that data to just members of that project team. Those members could span the entire organization or different business units, but that label only allows people of that group to access that document. So we've got confidential, and I've set all employees as the label. Now what this does is it classifies and labels the document as confidential. As you can see here, it's put some text into the footer of the document, and you can edit that as well. So you can set what that looks like. So you can do headers or footers, or you can do things like watermarks, for example. Those settings are a part of the label setup itself. Because this document also has the encryption, if I try and do things like download, it's actually blocked. So you can see document sensitivity label doesn't allow you to download it. If I do try and share this with an external party, so if I share this with my Valto account, if I then try and access that link as if I'm accessing it externally from another company, I actually get like an error message. So I don't have permission to open this document, even though it's been specifically shared with me. So we can see here the Azure Information Protection Service is blocking that. And that's how kind of sensitivity labels work. If you think of SharePoint contains all the permissions and you store documents in SharePoint, that's great. It's like locking documents in a room. But as soon as you've got the key to that room and you take a document outside of that room, anybody in possession can read it. Sensitivity labels are a bit like having the document in a briefcase. You can take that document away from the SharePoint site, which could be locked down to, say, the retail team only. But that briefcase kind of provides protection for that document no matter where it goes. So as you saw there, I shared it externally with my Valto account. I wasn't able to access it. If the document was saved onto a USB stick and then given to somebody else, again, as soon as somebody tries to open that document, it will say, you need to sign in with an authenticated Contoso account, and then we'll see if you can access the document. So the encryption kind of resides in Azure. You can also produce your own encryption keys if you want your own customer managed key as well. So let's just go into the Purview and kind of see how this looks when setting it up. So if I just go to Solutions, we've got Information Protection there. And this will take you to kind of the home page for information protection. Some of the things that we'll kind of recommend you do is maybe set up some of those scans that I talked about before. So registering some data sources and scanning your data to kind of see what information that you've got there as well. Then you'll get some recommendations off the back of it. As you start to use sensitivity labels across the organization, you'll get things like the label coverage and some more statistics on there as well. And then you'll get things like different reports for the labeling coverage and some documents, and also where label changes have been done. Okay, so if we go to sensitivity labels, so here's where we can actually define what labels we want. And you can see there's a whole host of different labels there. If I go to the confidential one and then go to the all employees one, as I showed you before, let's just edit this label. So we've got some kind of simple things here. We've got the name, the priority. We can choose different colors on there as well to make it easier for users. A description for users when they hover over it, they get a nice tooltip. And then a description for admins, the ones that interact with this portal. If we just go next, we can choose the scope for the label, so particularly where they can be applied. We're looking at things like SharePoint, so files and emails, for example. Then we can kind of choose some default protection settings when selected. So things like access control, the encryption, and then applying some content marking. So here now, the access control, this is probably one of the most powerful elements of sensitivity labels. So we can choose to apply permissions now when they select the label. We can do things like have the content expire. So if we label a document and then share it with a third party, perhaps they can access that content for a small period of time before we make the content completely expire. We can also allow offline access. So when you log into 365, your Office apps have your account logged in to authenticate. If you're kind of not connected or not, you're not on a Wi-Fi, you can allow those people to access the documents for maybe a set period of time. I recommend having a couple of weeks in there to kind of capture things like holidays and annual leave, but then also blocking the offline access later on down the line for that added security. Then we can actually assign the permissions. So this simply is who can access the documents on SharePoint. So here we've got everybody inside the tenancy has the standard co-author permissions, but we can be a lot more granular with this. So all users and groups in your organization, that's all of the users and groups that you create. You can do any authenticated users. So that would actually include guests or people you share things with. So you saw before I was blocked because it's set to all users and groups. We can set individual users or groups, perhaps if you want to be more granular. So it could be for a project or a specific department within the organization, like HR. And then we can actually specify email addresses or domains. Now, this actually works quite well if you're sharing externally, or perhaps you work with a trusted partner. It could be things like the local authority, health board, or another partner that you have. You can then encrypt the data and the documents, so only that partner or third party can access that information. So it's quite good of creating a sort of secure communications if you do share a lot of documents and data between two tenancies, for example. And then you can actually kind of specify even more granular permissions of what the people can do, how they can interact with documents. So perhaps you've got confidential or something that you send to a third party. You want them to be able to review it, but they can't. You want to remove the ability to print, copy, extract content. If it's an email, you can block things like forwarding and replying, and block things like editing. So you can go even further with the actions that those groups can actually perform on the documents. So again, really, really powerful. If we go to the next section, this is where I mentioned before, kind of the content marking. So this one here, it's got the footer I showed you before classified as confidential. You can make that bigger and change the color, or you can add a watermark that goes across the entire document. And here there's actually an ability, if you've got the right licensing, so if you've got either the E5 or the Purview suites or add-ons, or sort of P2, then you can add what we call auto labeling. So this is what we call client-side labeling. So if you publish this to a document to an end user, if they open up a document and it contains credit card numbers, it will automatically apply this sensitivity label to that document in real time. So that's what we call client-side auto labeling. When the document is opened, a bit like DLP, it simply matches a sensitive info type. Does it contain this, this, and this? If it does, then well, let's apply this label automatically. So again, can be quite powerful if you're relying on users to classify documents. This is a bit more of an automated way where it doesn't require that user intervention, requires less training because the system is acting on behalf of the user. So just to reiterate, this is client-side auto labeling. It requires a user to open a document before it then goes off and decides what to do. We've actually got something called server-side auto labeling, in that we can create a policy to automatically classify and protect documents by sort of running in the background. So it will actually scan the whole tenant, and if it matches based on sensitive info types, then it will go off and kind of auto label. It doesn't require the user to open the document. A user could save a document onto SharePoint. This would then run in the background and it would apply the label without the user having to open anything. Then we've got publishing policies. So once we've defined our labels, we then need to choose who gets the label and what's the default department, default behavior, sorry. So if we created a sales and retail label, well, there's no point publishing that to the HR team. Probably not going to be working with sales data. So here we can choose who gets what, basically. So if I go into the global label policy, let's just edit this. So we can choose exactly what labels are in scope for this policy. So these are the ones that we're going to publish. Again, we can use admin if we want to. And then we can specify who exactly gets those labels. So you can do it to users or into individual security groups. This is quite straightforward. It's just simply publishing the label to everyone. So as long as you're licensed, you'll be able to choose those labels. Then here we can do things like policy settings. So users must provide justification to remove a label or lower its classification. So hopefully this, there you go. So I'm actually removing a label that contains additional security and encryption, so I have to provide justification. And that's then logged and audited. You can also set more enforcive policies. So users are actually required to apply label to all of their emails and documents. So as soon as they create a brand new document in SharePoint, if they then save it, they'll have to apply some sort of label, even if it's a public label. It has to be applied. And then this one's quite handy as well. So you can provide users with a link to a custom help page. So when you're interacting with labels and the tooltip comes up, you can provide a link that maybe goes to a SharePoint site with some nice instructions and videos on how to interact with these labels, and also the kind of policies and things around classification. So you can give your users additional material to interact with these tools better. Then here we can actually choose. We can automatically set like the default label when they create documents. Again, if you're kind of setting everything as restricted, just be careful, because if in their usual kind of work streams, users do need to share those documents around the organization or with third parties, it could be things like sales brochures, for example, then you're going to restrict people from accessing that content, and it will cause issues. So be careful when planning this out. Let's just go next. So you can do things like labels on calendar events and Teams meetings, so it can prevent the sharing of data, for example, and also on sites and groups as well. So you can choose which labels are automatically applied to SharePoint sites when they're created. That's quite handy, because if you always work with sensitive information, an organization who needs strict classification, this is quite good at capturing everything by default. So as soon as site's created, the default label, could be one of these, for example. And then we simply go and publish that policy. If I go back into the SharePoint site, you can see if I go to, let's just come off this document library. There we go. There we go. So I can actually choose like default sensitive labels for this SharePoint site. So every time a new document is created in this library, it's going to inherit this label and apply all of that sensitivity settings on there. It won't capture existing documents in the library. So if you've migrated documents to SharePoint and you've got quite a lot of documents in there, you're better off exploring auto labeling if you want to capture that information. I suggest that you set up the default label before you start to migrate documents or you're using SharePoint. Okay, that's pretty much everything from the demo. If we just go back into Purview, I'll just go quickly through some of the additional tools as well. If we go into solutions, and the piece that we mentioned was the data lifecycle management. So this is all about retention labels. So here you can actually create different labels that retain the data for a certain amount of time. So, and then you can choose whether that data is reviewed or it's permanently deleted. So again, things like employee records you can keep forever. When things like products retire, you can then delete that data after 10 years, say. Then you've got things like policies where you can actually, a bit like with the auto labeling, the server side, you can create a policy that kind of runs in the background and searches for specific types of data based on your criteria, and then it can go and either retain and delete that data. Again, because it's a server-side policy, just be very careful. You can create policies that actually start to crawl the entire tenancy and start to purge data if you're not careful with your the criteria that you're selecting. So we recommend adopting this, maybe running it in things like simulation modes and running it on more granular sites before you kind of start to apply these more enforced policies across the tenancy. Then we can get things like an overview of recommendations to start to look at the scope and start to automatically apply these settings across the entire tenancy. And again, it hooks into the same technology we talked about before. So your sensitive info types, your trainable classifiers, even things like EDM classifiers, where you supply Microsoft 365 of lots of examples of records from, say, like a personnel database or HR, and then it recognizes the data in those records across things like documents, and it will match the two and understand that this is a sensitive info type. Okay, let's go back to the brilliant. So we'll just talk about some Purview success and how Valto modernizes, data governance with Purview. And in this example, it's for a large sort of UK housing association. So this is MV Homes. So they're a large UK housing association with just over 5,000 properties and around 500 staff. MV Homes had a legacy on-prem ERP and file shares for property and tenancy management. And kind of the business challenge was, I guess, fragmented data across the ERP, shared drives, and inconsistent retention for things like staff records and tenancy data, if you like. There was no single view of property and tenancy information, which then increases pressure from regulators and makes it harder to kind of remain compliant for things like retention and data disposal. So with the solution that we helped them kind of put together was to replace the legacy ERP with model-driven Power Apps for the tenancies, properties, repairs, and complaints. And then SharePoint Online was the kind of the central document and case file repository. So this kind of was the core of the entire solution. And using SharePoint Online as the foundations, we were able to implement things Microsoft Purview for end-to-end information governance. So we were able to implement event-based retention labels for HR, staff personal data, joiners, leavers, role changes. And then on the tenant and property lifecycle events, these would be things like housing records. So an event could be a tenancy start or end, a property sale, or major works completion. And then we were able to automate, disposition reviews for like high-risk record types. And we also migrated all of the organizational files from, legacy file shares into SharePoint Online with various document libraries we were able to design sort of a flat metadata-driven site and library structure, instead of lots of nested folders. These kind of metadata structures contain things like property, tenancy, and case IDs, which are all key metadata and document sets, which, and content types that align to the ERP and housing data model. And then we integrated SharePoint content with, Power Apps and the housing platforms to, surface documents contextually and enable much smarter searching and filtering and reporting, across all of these documents in ERP and HR. And in terms of sort of like the outcomes and benefits, we decommissioned legacy file servers, cut licensing and infrastructure costs. And then we had that single governed platform for staff, tenancy, property data, and everything was consistent and had auditable retention, with real automated disposition based on actual real business events, which is really, really good. These kind of all help with things like, faster responses to, data subject access requests and just standard audits that housing association has to go through, and a much kind of mature data architecture. I guess that one of the real benefits though was the events-based retention. So when a specific event occurs, like the end of a tenancy in a property, that event is then fired off, and the unique ID assigned to that property is then attached to a retention label. So we know that that data can now be destroyed within 10 years, I think it was. And it's all done automatically in the background with SharePoint, Purview events, and maybe a bit of Power Automate. And it's targeting the data on that SharePoint site to retain and then destroy without the need to kind of go in and manually add labels and things. So a really powerful solution. Much more confidence in that data retention piece as well. Okay, so the final actions really. So how to get started with SharePoint governance. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with 3 ways we can help you, take this to the next step. So you can book a free 1-hour session with one of our consultants. This is your chance to, ask some questions, explore challenges, and get some expert tailored advice to some of your goals really, and understand kind of your needs and what some of your issues are and what things you're having trouble with, and hopefully where we can help. Then we can kind of look through an experience demo, designed for your organization. So we'll talk you through a personalized Microsoft 365 and SharePoint demo, so you can see exactly how it fits your needs and the capabilities. And then we can then move on to things like a free data and security readiness assessment. So once you've spoken to a consultant, we can help understand where you stand today and what steps you can take to strengthen compliance, security, and productivity. And it's really easy. So just to get started, simply just reach out to hello@valto.co.uk. We'd love to help you unlock the full potential of Microsoft 365 and SharePoint governance for your organization. So that's everything today. Like I said, just reach out if you want to talk about anything else or something specific from the demo today. I hope you enjoyed it. I look forward to speaking to you all next. Thank you very much.